Sales Babble is sponsored by Vidyard, a video solution for sales professionals. This is the Sales Babble podcast, episode 384, Buyer-Centered Selling, an interview with Tom Williams.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Hello, Sales Babblers. This is Pat Helmers, and I can't help but ask, who's got the money? Who's got the pain, the problem, or the aching desire to be fulfilled? In short, it's the buyer. Yet in the industry of sales, the focus is always on what the seller should be doing, how the seller should act, how the seller needs to be resilient and tough and tenacious and have a mindset that never gives up. But today's guest, Tom Williams, he's got a different take on this. He believes that we should adopt a buyer-centered selling process and start to focus our energies on how buyers buy versus how sellers sell. He believes we should let the buyers take control of the sale to follow their lead and to mitigate the risk of choosing something new. We all know our greatest competitor is the status quo. If we can overcome that, we can be successful. By taking Tom's approach, we can find solutions that are a win for both the seller and the buyer. Dump your sales process and start to adopt a buyer-centered point of view. Now, before we get to the interview, I do want to apologize for the quality of the sound, especially on my end. Something happened during the recording that makes it a little bit distorted and a little bit annoying, and it's not the quality that I commonly want to share with the Sales Babble audience. But I was listening to the content and I was listening to what Tom was saying, and I thought, I just want to get this out to the public. I made this recording early in April. I've been sitting on it for a long time. I've decided to just pull the trigger and just suck it up, that I'm not perfect, that I am flawed, and that I do make mistakes. So if you could get over this, it's mostly Tom speaking. I don't interrupt too much. If you could give a little patience here, I would really appreciate it. And so, with no further ado, let's get to it. Welcome, Tom. Are you ready to babble?
Thank you, Patrick. Glad to be here with you today.
Everybody knows there's a ton of selling processes and methods out there, like conceptual selling, spin selling, challenger sale, da-da-da-da-da. But in my opinion, I don't think that's really a reality. I think it's really more of a buying process. Because buyers have the problems, they have the desires, they've got money, they're the ones that discern value. That's what you believe, correct?
Yeah, it is, Patrick. I think, the traditional methodologies need a facelift, and because most of them focus on what the seller needs to do, on a day-to-day basis, step-by-step process in a sales process, doesn't really address how buyers buy.
No, not at all.
What a surprise, huh?
I know. Right. Who's the people here who's got the money? Who's paying who?
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Is who's got the money, and I think there was a quote with that by a famous bank robber that was asked once when he was caught, why do you rob banks? And he says, because that's where the money's at. And so you'd think the salespeople, as sales professionals, we would do the same thing, right? We'd be more buyer focused.
But that's not the case at all. Why do you think that is?
I think it's training, it's education, it's habit, it's a failure to realize, what changes have occurred and how the modern buyer has changed. And I think part of it's, leadership is that, leaders are not training their people to be more buyer centered.
You have a book on this, right?
We do. And, we think, buyer-centered selling is really, it's a mindset and a strategy that is, focused on helping prospective buyers improve their outcomes, their measurable outcomes, through collaborative action. And there's, different steps to go through to do that.
Maybe we could walk through some of those steps.
Yeah, I think let's start with maybe the modern buyer, why should people care about, what the modern buyer is all about? And if you think about, the modern buyer, there's really several things that are intuitive to them. One is increased buyer knowledge, right? The first and foremost, buyers today are more informed than ever before because of the volume of content and the speed at which information, can be accessed. And so, they go to Google, first, then they read articles and blogs, they watch videos, they download white papers, all those kinds of things, and then and so they come to a buyer, come to a seller with a lot of information. But the problem is the information overload. They know what they know, but they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know what they don't know. And so that's where it's up to the seller to try to fill in that white space and that gap and really help them. The second thing, Patrick, I would say is the increased number of buyers. Is that it used to be like when we wrote the book, we quoted, the original was 5.4 buyers, and then it was up to 7 stakeholders or buying influences that were involved. Today, it's over 10. And so, there's more people involved. And as you get more people involved, as what it does is it creates an access problem for the seller, and it increases the length of time for the organization or the selling buying organization to actually make an informed, intelligent decision. Because there's a lot of dysfunction with those increased number of people. So what happens is it's a longer sales cycle.
When you got that many stakeholders too, it takes quite a lot of effort to like get all those people all together. It's like herding cats.
It is, and one of the issues is trying to, if you think about it from the buyer's perspective, one of the issues they have is how do I get internal alignment? And I need to get alignment around, around the change. Should we change it all from what we're doing? And then I need to get alignment around the solution requirements or specifications. And then I need to get alignment around the solution. And so if I don't get the first two right, the third one's not going to happen. And so again, sellers need to realize, that aspect of stakeholders. They also need to understand that it's a much lengthier research phase, than they've been used to. Buyers today, 70% of buyers today, wait to contact a sales rep uh, until after they've defined, internally, they actually want to make a change. And so, and it's also interesting the amount of research they do varies with deal size. Chopin did a study a couple of years ago, and as an example, for deals that were in the $50,000 to $100,000 range, 10% of them spent 0 to 5 hours of research. Well, 35% spent 11 to 20 hours. So they're coming armed with a lot more information. There's also their greater reliance on self-diagnosis. It's what we call an expanding subscription economy, that more and more organizations are looking to move from products to services. Subscriptions are just absolutely exploding because millions of digital customers are now favoring, access over ownership. And so they're thinking about what happens in their B2C market, things like Netflix and Amazon Prime, and now are starting to look for different types of buying experiences in the B2B market. And then I guess the next, if I took a couple more with you, I guess a couple other areas that your listeners should be aware of is, we're seeing a greater formation of buying committees. And this is because the increased number of people is now all about getting alignment, around, a group of people that oftentimes are dysfunctional and have, different buying criteria. I think the last two I would bring up would be, buyers today are looking for trusted sources of information. And this is a sad point for your listeners, but the the most important thing that buyers are looking for in terms of sources of information is their peers. In 2017, HubSpot did a study and found that the most important and most trusted sources of information were word of mouth, then customer references and sales and case studies, then media articles, then analyst reports and vendor authored materials, and then last was the sales rep. And it's because they just don't trust, what comes out of the average sales rep's mouth, and that's a sad point. And the last point I'd give you, Patrick, is generational shift. by 2025, 44% of the workforce is going to be millennials, and millennials grew up with technology and social media, and so being able to collaborate with them and provide messaging and things in a different format is going to be critical if you want to sell products in the future to the B2B buyer.
But it's interesting, though, that that's one of the least trustworthy channels for them when it comes to buying. That word of mouth and referrals matters a whole lot more than whether or not they see a blog post or a photo on Instagram, a post on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah, unless you become, that you sell differently, you become that sales rep that goes in and really positions yourself as someone with insight, with business acumen that understands problems customers have, and you post material and information on that. And it's unfortunate, but there's a ton of people on LinkedIn, but there's a very few number of people that are actually contributing content, and those that do really can stand out because the modern buyers going to LinkedIn profiles and going to websites to self-educate, and so if they're learning new information and insight from you, it gives you a leg up on your competitor.
Sales Babble is sponsored by Vidyard. Vidyard is an easy-to-use yet powerful video solution that makes it simple to create videos, host them ad-free, share them with others, and track their performance. Whether you're recording a video for one person or sharing it with the world on your website, it's easy to manage your video content. Vidyard's solution is built for business with robust analytics, integrations with top enterprise tools, and customization options that answer businesses' unique needs. But you may be asking yourself, what's this got to do with sales? Well, with Vidyard, you can differentiate your emails by putting a face to a name when prospecting, following up, and demos. You can use the same CRM and outreach tools that you use every day to build content the entire sales team can leverage and track analytics to know which videos convert best. Sign up for a free Vidyard account today by going to vidyard.com/babble, and as a bonus, get their high conversion virtual sales playbook. Again, go to vidyard.com/babble. That's BABBLE.
How did you come to this understanding? How did you come to these beliefs?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think the main reason was two things. One is that I've always been interested in strategy, and as I read reports like CSO Insights, very respected sales research organization. But if you go back through the years of their data and their insights, what was interesting is around 22 to 24% of the deals always went to status quo. And then if you looked at, these were forecasted deals. Now we're talking about deals that I come to you and I say, Patrick, take this to the bank. This deal's going to close this month. And 22 to 24% never, it went to status quo. Only about 47% of the deals were won and the rest were lost. And as I looked at that data, and it didn't change much more than a percentage or two year over year, I started asking myself, why is the sales methodologies not working? Because this study was agnostic. It wasn't a Miller-Hyman study. This was a study that looked at all the different methodologies, regardless of what people were using. And it was a worldwide study covering all kinds of industries. So, it got me started to think about that. And then as I started to talk to buyers, the light bulb, it was really a kind of a light bulb moment that went off and said, you know what? It's because we're all, every methodology is around what the seller should do. And it's not taking into account what the buyer should do. And so you kind of flip that paradigm and start thinking about it through the buyer's lens. It gives you a whole different insight and perspective.
Right. I could just conceive of a process that says something like, step 1, find out why the buyer reached out to you. Step 2, understand if they have a problem or an aspiration. Step three, and it's all about it's all about the buyer, right?
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because there's different ways to when you think about the way in which buyers buy things. It's interesting. You can as a seller, you can wait, for example, until somebody contacts you and says, hey, Patrick, would you give me a demo on this product, or would you give me a price quote, or here's an RFP, will you respond to it? And I can wait for that, but but if I do wait for situations like that, I have no idea what problem the customer has, what solutions they've looked at in the past before. I might not even know the specifications, and so I'm shooting an arrow up in the air and hoping to hit a bird. It's a crazy strategy. You're much better off to try to get somebody out of status quo, by sharing some insights and perspective with them to get them to think differently. Now you help to shape their ideas of what needs to be done differently, and make them aware that they have a problem that they didn't even recognize they had, and that you can help them think through what might be a viable outcome and solution that'll give them the benefits that they're looking for.
In some regards, this isn't a new idea. Think of the old days where you knew somebody you had a relationship with, but they were forced to go to RFP. So you would help them write the RFP. You'd give them a template, right? That was agnostic, supposedly, right? But but the questions were in a way that is most likely they would choose you. So they would actually use you as a help, as a consultant on their own buying purchase.
Well, and I think that still occurs. I think that's still probably the preferable way, for most buyers to try to handle, that unexpected RFP. I think what's really driven, I think, this whole change in buyer behavior is a couple things. One is the explosion of the internet, and the fact that there's just so much information that's out there that buyers can go and what I call self-diagnose, and come up with a potential list of vendors, without ever talking to a sales rep. Where in the past, if you wanted information, you had to reach out to a sales rep who could talk for days about the problems that they could solve, or the different products and services that they offered. And that doesn't exist. And today, you don't need the sales rep for that. You need them for to provide insight and perspective, and in a different way than they did before. And I think the second thing is you look at, um, the explosion of things like Amazon and others, where buyers are looking for a more frictionless experience. And so, they have no tolerance, if you will, Patrick, for, a sales rep is going to come in and give them an interrogation. They want a conversation. They don't want an interrogation. This classic discovery process. So let me come in and ask you 20, 30, 40 questions, and then I'll prescribe something. It's got to change.
Right. This puts the lead gen in a bind. If I'm a sales development rep or BD, SDR, BDR, I could be calling these people and they're nowhere near ready to talk to us. And in fact, it's highly unlikely that you're going to be able to help them exactly where they're at this time, or that they would even want to take your help at this time. If you called them up and said, are you thinking about doing this? You got this problem, you got this challenge, the classic kinds of things, right? What advice do you have for people in that situation?
Well, I think if you look at the data is showing it's taken an increasingly number of contacts or touch points to get to a prospective buyer. I think what you've got to be able to do is to come up with the right cadence, and really have confidence that you have a product or service that someone can use, and not give up after, 3 attempts, 6 attempts, or whatever it happens to be. You've got to, you give up when the customer sends you an email back and says, stop contacting me, you know. So I think you've got to look at it that way. I think the other thing is you've got to provide content that gets people out of status quo, and gets them to think differently. It's not a generic, email. It's not a generic phone call. You've got to have some value that you can actually provide. It gets people to think in a provocative way maybe there's a different way of doing this that I saw before. And I think once you get those, it's a whole different conversation. It's interesting. I had a phone call about a year ago into our main office line, and I'll kind of paraphrase, but this actually happened within a couple of hours of each other. And it was an amazing call. The first one was, "Hi, I'm calling from XYZ telephone service, and I won't tell you who it is. And we're offering a special on today, and we think we might be able to help you improve your phone services. Please call me back." And it was something like that. Well, had no idea. There's no value to me at all there to that. I just deleted the message. About 2 hours later, somebody called from actually the existing provider that we had and said, "Hi, Tom, I'm calling." This was a voice message. "Hi, Tom, I'm calling from XYZ phone company. We think we found a way to reduce your telephone services by 25%. If you're not the right person to contact, could you have someone else in the organization contact me back?" And left a number. I passed that message on, and we responded. You see that one was pitching me a product, the other one was trying to help me solve a problem that she didn't know if I had it or not, but she kind of assumed that I'd be interested in reducing my cost.
In some regards, too, it's like the previous caller actually kind of warmed you up to the idea. You were able to have that mull in your mind for like an hour or two. So when the second call came, you're like, "Well, it's funny you called now. I've just been thinking about that."
Well, in a way, but really, Patrick, the first one was more what I'd call a nuisance or an irritating call because there was no value. It was just, it was just an outright pitch. Would you be interested in X without having any idea of what am I using, what problems might I have, what problems might X solve for me? It was just throwing out an idea, and there was just no substance to it.
Right.
What does the buyer want sellers to be? There's really several things I think that they're looking for. One is insights that educate. Um, Insights get stakeholders to think differently, and oftentimes they're stories, they're data points, etc. Um, but they get people to think differently. I think the second thing is the stakeholders are looking for somebody who can help them understand what is a traditional buying process and help them modify or adapt that to their own organization. And this is a step that's often not done because the selling organization has a rigid sales process, but they've never mapped the buying process.
So they're actually looking for the salespeople for guidance and advice on how to buy.
Yeah, and I think that's the third one I was going to say is
Oh,
it's really, yeah, it's offer prescriptive guidance, right? It's to help them buy. It's to tell them, say, "Hey, I've got a process in place. Uh, that we have that we've been used successfully with other clients, and would you like me to share this with you?" And that in itself helps them. I mean, a good example of it is we use what we call an outcome enablement plan, which a lot of people call the main literature really calls it a mutual action plan. But all it really is a plan between the buying and selling organization to explore, jointly the feasibility and benefits of a business partnership. And so, think of it as a living document, that lists all the key activities under a set of milestones that must be performed by both parties in order to make an informed, purchase decision and for the buyer to get the desired outcomes. When I present this concept to buyers, and we've been using it for about 5 years, I've never had anybody turn me down. And it's prescriptive guidance, and it helps because it helps me to do discovery from a selling point of view, but it helps more importantly it focuses the buyer on their discovery because when we're trying to understand you know different aspects of is there a fit here and what type of solution can I provide. The buyer is trying to learn, I've got this problem I want to solve, but I don't understand what our buying process is within the organization because maybe it's the first time they've bought something. in the organization, or maybe it's the time that it's a product that's is purchased every 8 or 10 years, and they're new to the organization. Maybe there's been a reorganization. Maybe there's been an acquisition. There's a bunch of different reasons why a buyer may never have bought that particular solution before. They want help, and if you can help them walk through and determine what the decision process is and what the criteria is and things like that. Now you've made it more frictionless. You most importantly, you sold differently. You positioned yourself in a different way than every other sales rep. And after every sales call, I always ask the sales rep, if I was the buyer, would I look at you and say you were memorable or you were forgettable?
Picture if you took this attitude for every email that you send them, every voicemail that you leave them, every time you call them, every social media post, every blog post, every podcast episode, right?
Yeah,
Every YouTube video.
yeah,
Picture all the content, everything that you do is wrapped around the benefits of using your brand.
exactly. It's and so when you think continue to think about how what the buyer wants a seller to be. They want that better discovery process that benefits them. They want dynamic value messaging that is specific to the different stakeholders, or decision influencers within the team, and where they are in the buying process. They want help building consensus. As I said earlier, there's three different places you want to build consensus. One is around building the change, making the change. Do we actually want to do something different? And then the second aspect is, what are the solution requirements? And if you've done a good job of those as a seller, then the third one should be pretty straightforward, that you're the vendor of choice. And the last thing is, when was the last time that you saw anybody buy anything that didn't have risk associated with it? The safest thing is to stay with the status quo.
Yep.
And so
it's your number one competitor.
Yeah, and so reducing the fear of the fear that's associated with buying and making that change is important. And so anything that you can do to mitigate first identify what those risks are, risk and concerns, and then develop a strategy around mitigation. It's just absolutely critical.
Yeah. People wanted to connect with you, Tom. What's the best way of doing that?
Best way is to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Use my LinkedIn. I always love to get connection with people on LinkedIn. You can also go to our website, www.strategicdynamicsfirm.com. Or, if they want, if people don't mind picking up the phone, I actually answer phone calls. So 951-515-8159. I encourage people to call, encourage people to follow us on LinkedIn and connect with us.
And your book.
And the book is available. Both books are actually this buyer-centered selling and the seller's challenge are both available on Amazon, and they're available in bookstores worldwide.
Awesome. Tom, thank you for stopping by and babbling on Sales Babble. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Patrick. I enjoyed it and hope your listeners find it valuable.
After the end of the interview, Tom mentioned that he would like to give away a copy of his book to the first 3 people in the USA that listen to the podcast, and then post a comment on LinkedIn about what they learned or what resonated with them, and they'll receive a free copy of the book, Buyer-Centered Selling. Now, you've got to tag him and Sales Babble so that we know it was done. It'll also be helpful if you email Tom or email me. One other thing, those first 3 people, they'll also get a complimentary 30-minute video call on Microsoft Teams with Tom Williams. Tom is a great guy. You do not want to pass this up. To get links to his book and to Tom, you can find those in the show notes at www.salesbabble.com. If you got any questions or comments about this episode, while you're on the website, click the Babble Me button, and that will send a message directly to me. Please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. That's all we've got for this week, folks. Until next week, take care and have a highly successful and a profitable selling day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.
This is a production of Habanero Media.